Welcome back, folks. I am so happy to come to you tonight on what is it, February 7th. Man, it just seems like a New Year's Day was just yesterday, and it's going quick. And once you turn 60, man, it seems like downhill. And every month it goes so much quicker. So, but that's why we need to sow our oats now because before you know it, we're going to be in a pine box. Anyway, let's move forward. Today, my name is Tom Russell. I'm your host for Life Without Limits, and I've been doing this for almost 3 years now. And before I get started with my show and my guest tonight, I want to let people know who've new to my show or who have been to my show about how to get my two books. My first book is called Finding Your True North, A Bullied Teen's Journey of Hope. It's about a 14-year-old who gets bullied and he finds his way out of his situation. There's a lot more to it, but basically he learns a lot about himself and he succeeds. And the second one is called Nowhere Man, and it's about homelessness. And in fact, this book, I'm kind of hoping that I had sent this into a director, and I'm kind of hoping that we can make this one into movies. So if you want to find out about that book, you can find it at lifewithoutlimitsshow.com. That's lifewithoutlimitsshow.com. And you can order that and my first book. And you can also watch my previous shows on YouTube and also on iHeartRadio. I've got close to 160 shows, and you can pick and choose whatever you want to watch. So that's about it with this. Now, over the course of my show, I've invited guests who've overcome a variety of obstacles in their lives, and virtually all of them have found that extra push to not let their burdens dictate the quality of their life. But you know what? They'd be the first one to tell you that their struggles never end. It just doesn't dominate their every thought. In fact, what I've discovered talking with them is they've developed an incredible gift of a mindset of knowing that the only way to eliminate the negative is to accentuate the positive. And that's easier said than done, obviously, but it's just not easy. But they find a way to do this. And my guest tonight, he embodies that mindset. And before we started the show, we started talking about all the other things he's accomplished and what he's gone through with his life. It's just amazing that he does things. You know, and he has every right to look at these circumstances and just say, what's the point? It's never going to get better. But when you hear a story, I'm pretty certain you're going to appreciate your own life and realize you don't have it so bad. But here's the thing, folks. My guest tonight, Dr. Kevin Payne, he doesn't feel like he has it so bad. And there's a quote that I read. I want to find it here. And it says, I hate when people say overcome a disability or chronic illness. You don't overcome something you will have the rest of your life. You just learn to live with it and adjust around it. Does that about explain it there, Kevin?
Yeah, in a nutshell, there's no better, there's no happy ending. There is enjoying the journey and collecting the experiences.
That's right. And Kevin, I'm going to explain who you are and what you do first. But there's a reason why I open up with this, because when you hear Kevin's story, it's just amazing that all the things he's accomplished over the course of his life. And I'll read what he does. He's had multiple sclerosis since 1989, but it wasn't diagnosed until 2006. So imagine all those years that he was going through it before he was diagnosed. And he has a PhD in sociology and psychology from the University of Missouri Columbia. And he's a licensed coach. He's a D licensed coach rating of 500 jumps as a skydiver. We're going to talk extensively about that. And he's a professor of history for about 15 years. And he wrote a book that we're going to get into. It's called Your Life Lived Well. And I'm really excited to have you on my show, Kevin.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. I am delighted to be here with you on your show.
All right, well, we're going to start right into it because we don't need to necessarily go into your past. But in 1989, at the age of 20, you started to develop symptoms of MS, and what was going on with that? Did you simply feel that you weren't young enough to feel it wasn't a big deal in your life?
Not quite. Or toward the end of 1989, I just turned 20. I was in college, and my balance started going a little weird. And I noticed it in a fencing class I was taking, and some issues that never had been a problem fencing suddenly were. And of course, balance is really important there. So that started happening. I started getting cognitively foggy. I started getting really tired, and my eyes started. The best way to describe an eye saccade is like your eyes stutter all of a sudden. And so I had these weird symptoms. I couldn't explain them. I got kind of down about it. So after a couple of months, I went to see the university physician. He took a look at me, said, "Oh, you're depressed."
That's a physical thing that you were going through. I don't get it.
Well, but the thing he fixated on was that I was cognitively foggy and I was feeling down about it. And I was in a really demanding academic program. So I think he just kind of latched on to the kinds of things that he had seen students coming in with squishy symptoms report before. So he said, "You're depressed," and he sent me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, "Yeah, it's major depression," and he gave me some drugs, and the drugs didn't work, and he gave me some more drugs, and they didn't work. And he gave me some more drugs and they didn't work. And finally, he said, "Well, it's treatment resistant," which, of course, is the medical establishment's way of saying, "We give up. You're on your own."
So how did you react to that? Obviously, you were going through this whole process for quite some time. But I mean, how did you work your way through this?
Well, there were two things. One, depression ran in my family. So I was like, okay, maybe that was it. And two, autoimmune conditions run in my family also, but we didn't know that at the time. We didn't really understand about autoimmunity the way we do now. So the other thing you have to understand is relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis comes and goes. So I had these symptoms for a few months and then they went away. And I was back to my normal self again for a while. And then it was a couple of years later, I had another bout of symptoms, and then they were gone again. And it went off and on like that for a number of years, all through the 90s.
And did you end up going to the doctor throughout those, 15 years?
Well, I didn't actually go back until about 2000. And so in 2002, I started getting different symptoms. So, for all that time, that's all through my 20s. And just like most other young men, I was kind of walking around in the illusion of my own invulnerability. So I was like, shrug it off. But in 2002, I woke up one morning and I couldn't feel my left leg below my knee. Just disappeared. I thought it was kind of weird, but I figured I'd probably pinched a nerve lifting weights the day before. A few days later, it was back. So I was like, no big deal. But then it disappeared again. And then it was back. And then it disappeared. And then it was other parts of my body. And then finally, one morning I woke up and I could feel my right arm and my head, but the rest of my body was gone. And it was at that point that my then wife said, "I'm putting my foot down. You're going to get this looked at."
Yeah.
So I said, okay, and did.
Did you kind of feel like you really didn't want to hear the news?
No. I'm a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
I like information.
Mm-hmm.
More data is better. And when I was finally given a diagnosis, and at first it was a surprise because they had previously ruled out MS in my case. And then there was back and there was like, oh, surprise, we got better tests now. And yeah, there's no doubt. So I was relieved more than anything else because I finally had a name for all this weirdness that had been going on in my life for, by this time, 17 years.
Now, I think in the conversation we had, because man, we talked. It seemed like a long time ago, maybe a month and a half. I don't know, but
I think so, yeah.
I think you said something like 30 other symptoms came up after that.
Hmm.
How discouraging was that?
Well, so for me now, the way my MS has kind of settled down over the last more than a decade, my I've got my baseline symptoms that are like always there. So I always have some degree of numbness. I've got paresthesias, which are those phantom feelings. So I always itch. I always have like random electric shocks in my body. I always am in pain. I'm always fatigued. I'm always cognitively foggy. And at night, or when I get too hot or too cold, I have balance and vertigo and sometimes spasticity issues where my legs just stop working. So that's the baseline. And then there's another 30 symptoms that come and go on top of all that. And relapsing remitting MS is it's kind of a roulette wheel. I spin the wheel every morning when I wake up. I pause in my bed and I meditate. And I go through my entire body and my brain step by step, just identifying, okay, there's pain here, there's numbness here, I'm not responding to my signals really well here, and so forth. So that when my feet hit the ground and I get up that morning, I have a laundry list of what I know I have to work with that day. So I'm already planning and adapting for what I can do based on the limitations my body is giving me that day as I, go to the bathroom and start my daily routine.
Now you talk about the analysis of this, and I have to wonder about the emotional toll it could take on someone. It seems that you've kind of figured it out, but for someone who's might be going through something similar, because I was going to ask you this later, but I was thinking how demoralizing that could be, and how do you not get demoralized?
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
I did. And it was even worse for me because with my academic training, I got a PhD in people. I had all the knowledge about it, but knowledge isn't the same as the understanding of living it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to really work and struggle because I knew I was having a difficult time of it emotionally, but I was really hard on myself about that because from an academic perspective, I knew why I was. And I thought, well, I should be able to just acknowledge that and go on. But you can't. You've got to actually do the hard emotional work and work through that on that level as well. And it took me a while to do that. And I really did hit bottom before I went back. And as we'll get into later, I'm sure, skydiving
Mm-hmm.
was an important part of me coming to grips with a body and a brain that had constantly betrayed me and that I had fundamentally lost all trust in.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, since you brought up the skydiving, let's bring that up. And it is what I find fascinating about you, Kevin, is someone who has gone through what you've gone through with your life up to that point would take little baby steps and do some things that are functional at best for someone just to put one foot in front of the other. But you decided to do the skydiving thing. So tell me the genesis of that.
Well, there were two reasons. The first reason was skydiving was something that I had always wanted to do. As a little kid in the 70s, I became enamored of skydiving and started climbing everything I could and jumping off and building my own parachutes. And I bent myself up pretty good
Mm.
sometimes, but kept at it. And I realized, okay, I'm going to need real equipment for this. So in the 90s, when I was working on my doctorate and I was a young man, I said, I've waited long enough. And I started doing the training to become a skydiver. And I got a handful of jumps in, but Skydiving is not a hobby. It's a lifestyle choice.
Mm-hmm.
It is a massive commitment because you actually, it's not just flinging your body out of a plane. You have to learn how to be a pilot in two ways. You have to learn how to pilot your body in space, and then you have to learn how to pilot a canopy. And there are many different subdisciplines within skydiving, and so there's just lots and lots of stuff going on. It's not just falling to the ground. So I had a long gap in there. A lot of life got in the way, and it was family and career, and finally it was health. And one day, about a decade ago or so, when I was mowing the lawn and trying to be respectful of my limits and not overheat myself, evidently I miscalculated. And I ended up with just this massive relapse, pushing the lawn up the hill in the front lawn, and I fell back and I fainted and I passed out. And when I woke up, I was paralyzed on the ground, staring up at this beautiful blue sky. And I had this ironic thought that wafted through my head. This would be the perfect day for skydiving. And then I kind of laughed at myself and I said, look, I am paralyzed on the ground. I am never going to fly again. And I truly gave up on it at that point. And so one of the things that I think it's really useful to think of chronic illness as is lasting and repeated trauma. And as we go through year after year after year with chronic illness, it easily becomes this process of saying goodbye to the things that we loved about our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And there came a point where I hit bottom. I had a really awful exacerbation that was primarily cognitive symptoms. And people understand MS with the physical symptoms, but there are also cognitive and emotional symptoms that come along with it. And I had left the safest job in the world as an academic on the tenure track to become a startup tech entrepreneur. And this was right after my wife had gone through a decade of cancer, and we had almost lost her to that. And she was now healthy again. We still had little kids, but I thought it was time for me to finally jump in and do this tech thing that I'd wanted to do because I developed it from my research. And so she said yes, and we did that, and my brain blew up. And suddenly, without any net, because we had to have my brain working to get this technology out there,
Mm-hmm.
completely blew up the company. So here I am. My career is in shambles. My family is in shambles. My family decides that when I am at the very worst, I'm never going to get better. And my wife and kids left.
Mm.
And they said, this is more than we can take. And then a month after my son, who was the last one to leave, left, my dog, Nemo, I've had Akitas for 30 years now, and Nemo died suddenly of bloat in front of me. And I don't know if anybody listening who's had big dogs and knows about bloat knows it's awful. It is just a traumatic way to go. So I literally that was the last thing I was hanging on to. And I gave up, and I came to the place in my life where I said, I can no longer see a path from where I am now to any kind of life that I am interested in living. And it got, it got really, and I can't say it was emotionally overwrought. By this point, all my emotion had been stripped away. And it was just cold and rational. And I was to the point where I thought, yeah, the world's going to be better if I'm not around. And then my teenage son said to me, Dad, you know you really suck at doing things for yourself. And yeah, on the one hand, it's a
Yeah,
cheeky teenager thing to say, right?
yeah.
You know, that was pretty funny. On the other hand, it was soul crushing
Hmm.
because no father wants to hear their son say that to them. And I knew, you know, inside I'm thinking, I used to be really good at doing those kinds of things. And so I thought, I've got to give myself one more chance. I need to be humble in the world again. I need to strip everything away and go back to a beginner's mindset and do something that I know I'm going to suck at, that I know is going to be a real challenge, that I know is going to be a real struggle for me to get my body to do. But that is something that I knew well enough that I knew that there was so much joy in it for me because there is no joy like flight. I mean, when you are headed to the earth at 120 miles an hour and you sweep your arms back and extend your legs so you look like Iron Man, and you go into a track and you suddenly accelerate from 120 to 200 miles an hour like that. Wow. I mean, there is such a feeling of power and freedom, and I'm here on the ground clumsy. I'm falling anyway. So I thought, I am going to figure out a way to go back and skydive and be a legit skydiver. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to fall with style. So that's what I did. And in 2019, I went back. And it had been a 20-year gap. So I had to start all over again. But I had 13 jumps when I went back. So I had some idea of what to expect. So we start doing this and the training, and I didn't tell anybody at the drop zone I had MS to begin with.
Well, why not? Yeah, obviously, you thought they would say, forget it,
Yeah,
right?
be,
Yeah.
because I thought somebody would say, "Yeah, this is not for you. Go try bowling."
Hmm.
And sure enough, I found out later that if I would have told them that at the beginning, that's what they would have said.
Yeah.
So for me, it was I need to go up and demonstrate that I can do this safely, and that they are going to be, you know, okay with it, and then I'll tell them. So we went through the first few jumps, and it takes 25 jumps to get your A license. That's the first license in skydiving. And so I was going through these jumps, and I was having a real difficult time controlling my legs in free fall. And if your legs are out of kilter, then you start spinning and flailing through the sky, and it looks really terrifying really quick.
Yeah.
And so I had another one of these jumps, but every time I did that, I would always get stable and I was altitude aware and I pulled on time. And so that's like the minimum in skydiving to demonstrate you're going to be safe. So I got down from one of these jumps, and you always do a debrief afterward, and my instructor came over to me, and we're sitting there on a picnic at a picnic bench outside the hangar, and she sits down across from me, and she's a little wild-eyed, and she's looking at me, and she said, "Oh my gosh, that was the most terrifying skydive I've ever experienced." And she has thousands of jumps.
Yeah.
And she said, "What's going on with your legs?" So I told her I can't feel them below my knees. And I can't. I mean, so much so that you know, and it comes and goes by degree. But I've actually at one point stepped on a 2-inch shard of glass and
Mm.
embedded it in the sole of my foot and didn't even notice.
Wow.
I walked around with it until my kids started screaming that I was tracking bloody footprints everywhere.
Wow.
So so I couldn't, you know, I couldn't feel my legs to understand where they were. So everybody in the Sky family, and skydivers call each other Sky family, and they all really banded around and helped me. And we did a lot of extra training on the ground and went to wind tunnels, and so I could have an instructor right there with me saying, "This is where your leg needs to be." So even though I couldn't feel where my lower leg was doing, I did understand that if I if I learned to decipher the signals from the tendons behind my knees. I could understand what my leg was doing by the tension there. And so that's what I did. I just got creative. And even though I can't feel when my feet touch down if I'm standing up a landing, I could learn how to feel the pressure at my knees. So by being creative and being adaptive and having people help me, most people take 25 jumps. It took me 47 jumps to get my A license, but I got it.
I'm surprised after you told them that you had MS, they said, okay, we'll let you go. I'm surprised they said that.
But they did it because I'd always demonstrated that I was always safe before they knew. So I had one specific issue that I was always dealing with. That was the leg awareness. So because I was doing everything else that I needed to do, they were like, okay, we can help him figure out a way, to compensate for this.
Now, what I found extremely fascinating when I brought the subject up, because I always thought of what I'd like. That's one of my things I'd love to do is do some skydiving. And I ask you the question, how many seconds do you have to make that decision to pull the cord? So what is it? I can't remember how many seconds you said it was.
Yeah. So normally we go out at 14,000 feet. And at 14,000 feet, when you exit the plane, I always have a little voice in the back of my head that says 82 seconds. Because at 14,000 feet, falling on your belly, I will impact the earth at 82 seconds from exit. So that's my life expectancy unless I do something right. And that's one of the things that I love about skydiving, because for me, remember I said there were two reasons that I went back. And the first one was, reclaiming that childhood dream. But the second was I had become so afraid of my own body. And I'm not a fearful person. I'm a person who's always said yes to experiences, but I found myself at a place where I was increasingly saying no in my life. And that's one of the reasons I'd gotten so depressed about it. And so in a skydive, there comes a point, and it actually is, if you look at the cover of my book, that photo on the cover of my book is taken. This is actually the exact image I wanted for the cover of this book. It took 8 jumps over 6 weeks to capture that image. I'm at 5,000 feet when that picture was taken, headed to the earth at 120 miles an hour. That means if I did nothing, I've got 27 seconds left to live, less than a TV commercial. And I've got both of my hands up here to my forehead. And what that is a gesture all skydivers will know. You put your hands up like this, and then you sweep them out wide, and that's called the wave off. And that is how every skydiver tells everybody else in their airspace, I am now going to take action to save myself. And that is a remarkable thing. In every skydive, you have to actively choose life. And so after I got my license in 2019 and logged about 140 jumps that year, in 2020, I set myself a bigger goal. And I said, I'm going to become a serious skydiver, which means finishing all the licenses. That's 500 jumps, getting coach rating. That's the first professional rating you can get. And that meant if I was going to do it in 2020, I'd have to log better than 1 jump a day for the entire year. So while everybody else was locked down under COVID, I was screaming through the air 370 times in 2020. And every time dialing my acute stress response up to 11, which they say you're not supposed to do with MS. The first thing they tell you is avoid stress. And I think that's a load of crap. you have to learn to reframe stress, because all the good things in life have some kind of stress involved with them as well. That's excitement. That's what it is. So that was my goal. I wasn't fighting the fear of heights. I was fighting the fear of my own body. And I thought, if I could repeatedly every day fling myself to earth and use my wonky body to save myself every time, then I could develop the confidence that I needed to go out into the world and finish the book and build the company and the technology and all the other stuff that's part of Your Life Lived Well.
Now, how do you know when to pull the cord? I mean, when you said you did the hand signal thing, that's when you need to do it. How do you know when to get to that point?
We've got altimeters.
Mm-hmm.
So and most skydivers have at least two on us. So we've got one that we wear in our wrist. In that case, you can tell right here, that little square that's sticking out. Normally, the second altimeter is in your helmet, but I don't have a helmet in this jump because I wanted my face to be really clear there so everybody knew, yes, that is indeed me, no fakery. Yeah. But that's a second altimeter that's on my rig there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you have to always be altitude aware, so we're always checking it. The altimeter in your helmet isn't audible. And I also have on mine, on the visor, on my helmet, there's a series of LEDs that are giving me a readout that tell me how high I am.
Okay, now I understand. Now, I always, because you have 82 seconds, but if I was in that situation, there'd have to be a myriad of things going through my mind, not the least of which is knowing when to pull the cord and all that sort of stuff. But when you have time, you've done this over and over again, when you have time to actually think about the process and what you're witnessing, what goes through your mind?
Well, see, it's the first few jumps, it is absolutely overwhelming because it is so far from anything that humans were ever adapted to experience. And it is just a jumble of color and motion and noise, and your adrenaline is just jacked through the roof, and it seems to happen in an eye blink, and you don't even have a really clear recollection of what's happened. But as you do it more, it is amazing how marvelously adaptable humans are. And it becomes not fear, but a little bit of excitement. You're like, oh, I've been here. I've done this before. I save myself all the time. I'm the kind of person that can relax and enjoy this. And pretty soon it's not an adrenaline pumping experience. It is the most beautiful, peaceful, mindful, focused, undistracted experience you can imagine. And that's why those of us who love the sport do it. Not because we're adrenaline junkies with a death wish, because those people get weeded out of the sport pretty quickly, typically. The people who do it are the people who understand this zen of being in free fall, of floating, because you don't feel like you're falling. There's no stomach drop. You don't have that experience. And you are so far out of any other frame of reference that you truly do feel like you're floating or flying. And to be out there and to intuitively control your body. So you see your friend 100 yards away over there, and you're like, oh, I want to go over to them and dock with them. And so, and you just think it, and you streak over to them and you match fall rates, and you've done it so many times that you're not even consciously thinking about it now. And you dock up, and you do a routine. Maybe you free fly, so you're in a sit position, or you flip over. I like head down flying. So you flip over so that you are like an arrow pointed at the ground head first, and you're streaking toward the earth at like 200 miles an hour or more, and it's just an amazing experience. But there's so much confidence and accomplishment when you do this after a while, and you realize, yeah, I'm the kind of person who can put myself in a position that would absolutely terrify most humans, and it's just Tuesday for me.
And I'm just thinking, Kevin, going back to what you said, that you're absolute nadir, when you went through your bout of depression, where you said, I can't do it anymore, and now you're doing the skydiving. Do you kind of feel like that saved your life?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that was it was it was only part of it. I mean, there's meditation and exercise and rebuilding habits, and lots of other science were involved in this as well. But there is no doubt that skydiving was a crucial component of that for me. It's not just about building competence in a body that doesn't do a lot of things very well, but building the community, because skydivers call each other Sky Family, and we have a really close connection. Most of us, pretty much instantly. It's the kind of connection that you often see amongst, say, military personnel or first responders, people who are out on the edge facing death, all the time together, because you have to trust anyone you skydive with implicitly. Because if they're out of control up there and they meat missile you, they can kill both of you instantly. So there's an amazing amount of trust and mutual respect that you build up with your Sky family, and you're the only people that get that experience. And it's not like there's a lot. There's like maybe 150,000 active skydivers in the whole world.
Now you explained, talk about the fear. Fear can just be so paralyzing for so many different people. It's not just the skydiving, but everything else in life. What kind of message do you give those who struggle with dealing with their fears?
Well, so this is like chapters 2 through 5 of my book. It's a really important topic, and what I would first say to people is that what you think is fear is not fear. We think that physiological response that we feel is fear. That's not fear. That's arousal. That's physiological arousal. And what it is a very old primal brain system that is amping our body and our brain for a very specific kind of acute challenge. And it's not necessarily fearful, it's a challenge. And what that means is it's at some level, your mind is sensing before you some kind of experience that you're about to have that is going to require a lot of your effort and skill, and it's going to test you. And there's a possibility that you could fail. But all that same physiological response doesn't just happen with fear. It happens with excitement. It happens when we begin to get intimate, say, with a new person that we're interested in. It happens when we become really accomplished at an activity. Maybe it's playing the piano or sports or whatever, some kind of craft or an art that you're good at. And you have those flow experiences where you kind of get in the zone, right? You get in the groove, and how the same physiological response. And my point here is the very worst experiences that we have, fear, overwhelm, and if it becomes too much, trauma, are not the opposite of the best experiences that we have. They're right next to each other at the edge. And if you are at one side of the edge where your capacity is a little bit more than the demand in front of you, you succeed and you have some of your greatest successes. But if that ratio is flipped just a little bit, you have some of your most abject failures. And all of that is the result of the acute stress response. Jacking us up to try to deal with a very specific kind of challenge. The only problem is the world that we've created often has chronic challenges. And they're not finite problems that we can identify, solve, and then move on. There are issues like my MS, which is never going to get better. I hope to keep it from getting less worse as slow as possible. That's the best I can hope for. And so chronic challenges like chronic health conditions are not what humans are adapted for. And yet that's what most of us are facing now. And so reframing that and understanding what's really going on there and how you can change your mindset and interpret that differently and use those tools differently, that was, the first part of the book, because that is so crucial.
Now, you had two separate lives, as far as I can see. Correct me if I'm wrong. You had your life before skydiving, your life after skydiving, and you looked at your chronic illness with MS before as very daunting, to the point of just I'm just going to give up. But after skydiving, how have you learned to live with it now with the chronic illness?
I think, the first few years with MS, the first few years that I knew that I had MS, went pretty well. And then it was just year after year of not getting any relief. And then at the same time, truth be told, what was even harder on me was the stress of being a caregiver to a partner who was obviously dying. Because you know what somebody looks like when they're slowly dying of something. I mean, she had all the signs. Now, thankfully, she was saved at the very last instant with surgery, but it didn't save us as a relationship. And the stress of being the caregiver and seeing someone I loved fading like that was more distressing to me than my own illness. And then after, it wasn't until I had the exacerbation with the cognitive symptoms that my MS became something that I didn't know how to deal with and that I was overwhelmed. So there were probably like 3 phases with my MS there. And for a while it was okay. But on top of everything else, it got to be too much. And then it got to be really, really, really bad. And then it was skydiving that saved me.
And you chronicled all this in your book. Again, it's called Your Life Lived Well. What's the genesis about that book? You had to stop and start with that, right?
Yeah, I did. I initially wrote it as the science, because one of the things that I did is, as soon as I was diagnosed, I put on scientist hat. And I started collecting data about myself, and I was collecting up to 80 different variables every day, and amassing those data and running mathematical models and trying to predict, how I could use my leading indicators to understand what was going on with my condition, and then I got interested because all the way back in the 90s, I had started doing research in an area on, I found one question really fascinating. Why do some people succeed and others fail under difficult circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
And that was really easy after I was diagnosed to morph into the question, how can you live well even if you are sick? So I started looking first at studies related to MS, but then I'm a social psychologist, so I'm not going to be able to contribute to a medical solution. But what I did understand was that 2/3 of all health outcomes are not due to medical factors. They're not due to biomedical factors. They're due to cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and environmental factors. Well, those are things that I know something about. And so my issue was, I think we need to do a better job of shifting the conversation from a sick care system that is still trapped in an acute care mindset, even though chronic care is most of what we're doing, and instead look at a quality of life care and to look at it more holistically. Because there's some ways that I will never be quote unquote healthy. Just out of the, it's out of that. But what that means to me is that means that I have all the impetus in the world to be as healthy as I can as in every other way. So, I exercise and I eat right and I sleep well and I do all those other things that I can to give myself as much ammunition for the fight as I can.
Yeah, because I mean, just looking at you and talking with you, it's just you're just you look like a normal person. I think some with the MS, they kind of have the stigma that I've had one guest that she had a hard time talking. It was that developed, but you seem to hold yourself pretty well. I've got about another minute. How do people find your book?
They can go to yourlifelivedwell.co and find everything about the book. You can even get 100 pages free download, see if it's for you or not, because I don't want anybody to get it that's not going to actually use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they can find out about the podcast and the classes and everything else that Your Life Lived Well does, and follow us on all the social media and stuff. Go to yourlifelivedwell.co and find everything you need. And so you can contact me too.
So it's a co and not com?
It's a co.
Oh, that's interesting. How does that work?
One less letter. They could also go to justjump.life.
Yeah.
And that is mapped onto the same place. So if you,
I got you.
Yeah.
How do they reach you?
Just there, and that's got all the information that they can contact me via email or send a form or follow me on social media and can contact me that way. So just go to yourlifelivedwell.co and do what you want out of that, because it's a one-stop shop.
That's awesome. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on my show. It's very revealing and very fascinating and very uplifting. I know that I've gone through these issues myself, but your mindset is also off the charts. So again, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Tom.
And as I end all my shows, I hope you guys aren't getting tired of this, but these 4 little phrases mean a lot to me. I want everyone to smile infectiously, laugh genuinely, love unconditionally, live courageously. I believe in all of you. And make this week the best week of your entire life, because once you start focusing that mindset on that, anything is possible for you. So have a great week, folks.